Welcome to Lesson 5 in Unit 25, Science in St. Louis. In this lesson, students will be answering the question, how do players and fans react to a home run? In this lesson, students will consider how they receive information. As humans, we receive information through receptors, like our eyes and our ears. The way we get information, though, is through waves like sound waves and light waves. Toward the end of this lesson, we'll make models about the different types of sound waves and light waves and the properties that make them unique. In the engaged portion, students will watch this video that explains how baseball players have to interpret all of this information when they are deciding whether or not to hit a pitch. This video should set up students to think about how we receive information through light and sound. In the explore portion of this lesson, students will complete a reaction time lab. This lab will show students how our brain receives information from our receptors and then tells our body how to react to that information. For this lab, you'll put students in pairs and you'll give each pair of students a ruler. In this reaction time lab, students will conduct two tests. One test to see how quickly they can catch the ruler when they release it with their eyes open, and another how quickly they can catch the ruler with their eyes closed. This will be testing two of our information receptors, our eyes and our ears. In the explain portion of this lesson, you'll transition to talk about how we receive this information. So our receptors, like our eyes and our ears, send this information to our brain, but how in the world does this information get to our eyes and our ears? You'll discuss this with your students by reading the book Waves of Sound and Light. You'll read chapters 1 and 2. Use the Read Aloud guide to help you focus on the specific vocabulary that students will need to know, like wavelength and amplitude. This book should serve as a reminder for students about the properties of sound and light waves. We really want students to focus on wavelength and amplitude as they go through this explain. In the next part of the explain, students are going to construct a model using a baseball game. In the first model, students will show how the batter receives information from the crowd. You can use an interactive whiteboard or have students manipulate this model on their own Chromebooks or iPads. To do this, they'll take the labels at the bottom and they will drag them to a certain position on the model. So we know that the crowd is making noise. So we will move the noise label to the crowd. That noise is being transmitted to the batter. So we'll take our arrow and we will move the arrow onto our model, like so. Your students will continue to construct this model to describe how the noise reaches the batter, how the batter processes this information, and how the brain in the batter tells the batter how to react. Students will then construct another model to show how we can see objects when light is reflected off of them. In the elaborate portion of this lesson, we'll revisit the idea of the baseball colliding with the baseball bat. In this section, however, we're going to focus on how the collision creates a wave. All waves, regardless if they're sound waves, light waves, or waves that travel through objects, have similar properties like amplitude and wavelength. In the next activity in our elaborate section, students will use yarn and tape to create models of waves with different amplitudes and wavelengths. They will be asked to create 4 different types of waves with their yarn and tape to construct their model. To expand the discussion of the properties of waves to sound waves and light waves, there's 2 websites you can visit to show how sound waves can change in amplitude and wavelength and how light waves can change in amplitude and wavelength. In the evaluate portion of this lesson, students will take a short assessment to show what they've learned about reactions and waves. Students will be asked to interpret a model and evaluate the different properties of a wave, and then they'll also be asked about how light and sound are used to give humans information. By the end of this lesson, students will have built models to describe the different properties of waves like amplitude and wavelength. They will have constructed models to describe how light and sound travel and how humans use that light and sound as information, processing them through their receptors and brains and then reacting appropriately.